Hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the millennial bridge to abundance. So what exactly do I mean by the millennial bridge to abundance? And how do we get to an abundant world, a post-scarcity world in the next 10 to 15 years? Or what I like to say, how do we make sure we're in a Star Trek future, not a Mad Max or a Terminator-style future? So let's define, just for a second, millennials. We hear a lot about them. They just last week became the largest voting demographic in America right now, beating out their parents, the baby boomers. Yeah, give an applause for the millennials. We hear a lot. I mean, you guys are thinking, how are the millennials going to build the bridge to abundance? We hear about them being lazy. We hear about them being entitled, but it's really in our destiny. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as to why that is the case. So real briefly, for those of you who guys aren't too much aware of generational theory and kind of the generational cycles, millennials were born from 82 to 2003, and they're the largest demographic in American history. There's 100 million with immigration. They're extremely connected, obviously. Everybody's online all the time. We're super diverse, and we tend to be in the civic and hero-oriented mode for generations as far as they go. Now, if you go backwards, you go 20 years before, there's the Gen Xers, who are right before the millennials. You go back in time 20 more years, most of the millennials' parents, the baby boomer generation. And then if you go back 20 more years, you have the silent generation. And the silent generation never had a single presidential candidate. They're a little sore about that. The boomers have had way more than them. So these are the four generations. And we're also at this really unprecedented time in human history. We've been hearing all about it today. We're in this technological acceleration. We want to make sure the next 10 to 15 years, we build off all these amazing technologies and we get ourselves to the post-abundance future. So abundance, this would be the utopia that most of us are maybe afraid to dream of. It's really amazing the era that we're in, where we might be able to cure diseases in the next 15 years. We might be able to feed humanity. We might be able to make sure most of the Maslow hierarchy needs are taken care of for the planet. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that we address these huge challenges that we're going to see over the next 10 to 15 years to make sure that we're going to overcome these obstacles towards abundance. So these new technologies, you've 3D printing food, you've got drones and disrupting agriculture. It's really a tremendous time. But at the same time, you also have, as a side effect of all this amazing technology, technological unemployment. So most of you guys just saw that Uber just started doing driverless cars in Pittsburgh just the other week. Singapore also just recently started doing it. So it's not just driverless cars and all of the long-haul truck drivers in the next 5 years that are going to have their jobs replaced. And let's remember, that's the largest amount of jobs for men in the United States right now is trucking. And so those 7 million jobs that are going to be displaced are just the beginning. This is if you're in law school right now, if you're in medical school right now, if you're going to be an accountant or radiologist. I hate to say it, but there's a very good chance in the next 10 to 15 years, your job is going to be replaced by automation. So why are we not hearing about this? If this is such a major issue, and if in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to be experiencing this major transformation in society, why is it that the public at large has not caught on about it? And that's really because a lot of economists are still giving kind of the political class cover. So there are still a lot of people saying, well, 100 years ago, we all worked on the farm. 98% of people were involved in the agriculture industry and worked on the farm. And today, only 2% of people work on the farm. So that's typically a lot of the parallels you'll get when you talk about automation today. But those are really not analogous at all. We have never been in an era where you have robots with real dexterity that are actually now taking over manufacturing plants it's not just low-skilled work, it's also white-collar work that's starting to be replaced. So we really need to think about the ramifications of this technological unemployment. So again, we want to make sure we get to this abundant, post-scarcity world. But at the same time, as we know, this technology has two sides to it. So while you see these amazing 3D printing hamburgers and it's going to do amazing things, we also see all of these tremendous tragedies that are happening all over the world. You look at the things that have happened over the last year and a half in Paris, just a small group of people creating so much havoc. You look at closer to home, you look at what just happened in Orlando, one person creating so much damage. And even closer to home, you look at San Bernardino, which we can all remember that tragedy that just happened. And not to freak everybody out, but the couple that were in the San Bernardino shootings, they were not even on the top 1,000 list that the FBI was investigating. So that caused major international news. It caused such a terrible tragedy, and these people were not even in the top 1,000. And if you guys remember, after the San Bernardino tragedy, several weeks after, there was an email that went out, and that email threatened several of the public schools in the United States. And so it was sent to the New York Public School District. It was also sent to the Los Angeles Unified School District. And because there had been an attack very recently, they decided to shut down school for 700,000 kids here in Los Angeles. That was one spam email coming from Germany that had the impact of shutting down school in the second largest school district in the country. So while we're seeing this amazing technology create all these possibilities, we're also seeing all of these terrible tragedies that people are using this technology for. And so this is going to be even more significant in the next 10 to 15 years, because when we think about extremism and when we think about different types of extremism, whether it's related to ISIS, whether it's related to white supremacy, whether it's related to street gangs or other types of violent extremism, who do they typically target? Who are the recruits that these groups tend to go after? They tend to go after young men who are jobless. So over the next several years, as we get into this position and half of the jobs in the United States can be automated, and globally as well, you're gonna have these huge populations of young men that are gonna have access to all of this technology for good or bad. And so how are we going to solve this? How are millennials going to really overcome these challenges? We want to make sure we're in this post-scarcity abundant world, not a Mad Max world, as cool as those movies are. And this is really speaking, we're at TEDxHollywood right now. We're with the creative class right now. This is where all of you come in. We need more positive visions for the future. Why is it all the movies in the future really are dystopian? Why is it so many Terminator movies? Why is it so many Mad Max movies or even Star Wars movies, which are cool movies? But we need to see more movies that are really talk about a future where there's half the population is unemployed. What does that look like? For so many years, Americans have had this puritanical work ethic. So many people have defined, their meaning from their work. And when we live in a society in the future, we as the creative class need to really start creating films, start creating television shows that deal with this reality of robots being part of our society and half the people in society not working. So that's one of the things we need to do. And you can see, we need to activate the people that are here. We also need to bring technological unemployment to the forefront of the political debate. Can you imagine what is the number one issue in the country right now in the middle of the presidential debate? The number one issue is jobs, right? The number one issue. Now, we've had hundreds, think about this for a second. We have had hundreds of questions posed to our presidential candidates during the primary debates, and we're going to obviously have more questions. Have you heard a single question that says, hey, Mr. Trump, Secretary Clinton, Germany just brought back manufacturing. Adidas just brought a factory back to Germany. So they just brought manufacturing home like what you're promising. But in this Adidas factory, there are no humans. It's all robots. And how is that going to be any different than here in the United States? That question has yet to be posed to our presidential candidates. People in the media are ignoring this because there is some cover from economists to say, well, the boy has cried wolf before on this. Every time people say there's automation and technology and robotics, it never comes through. This time truly is different. So these are the things we need to do in order to get the public aware and start really trying to have a vision for what this future is going to look like. And we also need to, for this rise in extremism. So again, during this 10 to 15 year transition period, we really need to make sure we have a plan to combat all of these young men that are going to be out of jobs, that may be open to extremism, that may want to create all this terrible, terrible harm. So this is where we can look towards Hollywood again. So some of the work that my group has been doing over the last year is we've actually created our very own suicide squad. So if you guys look right there at the picture, these are a few of my friends. The guy in the front, Mubin Sheikh, is a former Islamic jihadi, trained in Yemen, trained in Syria, ended up going undercover for the Canadian CSIS, and ended up disrupting a terrorist cell, the Toronto 18 in 2006. So there's some other pictures of him online that you can see he looks a little bit different in the past. The guy behind me is Devante, who used to be a Bloods recruiter in New York City who ended up getting out of the Bloods in order to become a magician. So he was able to de-radicalize by actually learning magic, and now he goes to kids and he tries to get them off the street by teaching them magic. The last guy on the screen right there, Arno, Michaelis, he's about to meet a new A&E show. You guys can check it out. He started the largest white supremacist group in the United States years ago. He also had this rock band that was all about hate, and he sold 20,000 records. I think he's a Guinness record for that, for selling the most amount of hate records. So the four of us, I mean, it's crazy because when you think of it, is an Islamic jihadi, a white supremacist, a former gangbanger. What do they have in common? It turns out they have a ton in common. It turns out that when you hear their stories and how they ended up getting into these radical groups, what were their motivations, it turns out it's very similar. When you find out how they were de-radicalized, it's also sort of the same story. And what's really impactful about this group touring is that it sort of addresses all the different extremist groups out there. So if you're talking to different communities, instead of singling out one particular type of hate, by talking about it from a holistic point of view and talking about all the different forms of extremism, people tend to listen a lot more. And frankly, this is a very fun group. We go around, so hopefully we'll see you guys on tour. So remember in the early part of the presentation, I talked about millennials, and it's in our destiny. Why are we going to build the bridge to abundance? A lot of people seem confused, how are millennials, this particular group? Well, if you look back into generational theory, and this is going to sound a little bit new age-ish, but it's all data-driven, empirical. Millennials, as I mentioned, are part of the hero and civic-oriented generation. Things like Teach for America, a lot of young people running for public service. So if you go back again, there's the Xers, the Boomers, the silent generation. Then this resets itself. So the generation the millennials are the GI generation, the World War II generation who fought and saved the world during World War II. You go back 80 years again, this is the Civil War generation. And again, go back 80 years, it's the Revolutionary War generation. So it's definitely in our destiny to build the bridge to abundance. And we need the Hollywood community, and we need people who aren't interested in these topics to really start to help us create a vision for the future. Thank you.